All right. Well, I'm going to welcome everyone to the Asian American Chamber of Commerce GovCon webinar series. Our topic today is, can contractors request contract modifications to accommodate teleworking? But we're not going to limit ourselves to just that. Section 3610 is what we're going to talk about. Our speaker today is, I tried to pronounce his name. Our speaker today is Christoph Minarchik, and our moderator is Sherilyn Laban. They have tons of information for us. I'm sure you all have lots of questions. Please type those questions in. We're not taking or not going to turn on audio for our audience. So please type your questions in. This webinar is being recorded. A recording will be emailed out to all registrants and participants. You can still refer back to it. A quick word on the Asian American Chamber of Commerce. We're dedicated to improving the economic development for all businesses. While we call ourselves Asian American Chamber of Commerce, we have members across all socioeconomic categories, all types, and we are dedicated to the economic development of all businesses in the Virginia, DC, Maryland area. AACC facilitates the growth and development of member businesses through networking, business expo, business development workshops, seminars, and other events. You can sponsor AACC webinars, and you can reach out to us to get more information on that. A quick disclaimer about today's webinar here. This webinar is for informational purposes only. We are not providing legal opinions or legal advice. So please do not assume that this is anything other than information. All copyrights apply to these slide decks. A quick word about myself. I'm your host today. My name is Reena Bhatia. I'm the CEO of Proposal Helper and Bid Execs. I've been a board member of Asian American Chamber of Commerce for a little over a year, and I run their GovCon webinar series. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on myself because I know you want to get to the topic at hand. So I'm going to introduce our moderator today, Sherilyn Laban. She's a partner at Dunlap, Bennett, and Ludwig Law Practices. She covers pretty much all practice areas: business, government, contracting, nonprofits. And I'm sure if you reach out to her for something that's not in her practice area, she'll find you a resource. She spent 20 years in the Washington, D.C. area and abroad. She has served on various positions with the Small Business Administration, Department of Veterans Affairs, and has been an advisor to members of Congress and presidential candidates. Sherilyn, your bio can go on forever. So I'm going to turn it over to you, say a few words about yourself, and then introduce our speaker, please.
Thank you very much, Reena, and thank you to the Asian American Chamber of Commerce for hosting us. And this is just really a timely topic, so I hope that our guest today will get a lot out of it. As Reena said, I'm a partner at Dunlap, Bennett, and Ludwig. I focus on business, government contracting, and nonprofits. We're going to talk today with our guest, Christoph Minarchik, who has years of experience in government contracting. Christoph Minarchik is an attorney, professional instructor, consultant, frequent public speaker, and nationally recognized subject matter expert and prolific author of 50-plus publications on government contracts and acquisitions. He's an experienced expert witness who has provided expert opinions and reports, research covering damages, key findings, and case strategy for complex contracts litigation. Christoph, thank you so much for being with us today. It's really a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. And thank you to the Asian American Chamber of Commerce for hosting us. Thanks to you and thanks to Reena.
So let's get started because this is, there's so much going on right now. Let's start right off, Christoph, with the topic of Section 3610 of the CARES Act. And just let's chat a few minutes about the finer points of the provision and on any updates as we know them as of today. And I preface every webinar during COVID with the conversation with, these are the facts as we know them right now. We know that the facts could very much change the next hour and tomorrow. So let's talk a little bit about Section 3610, Christoph, and the finer points of the provision.
Sure. Okay. So what is this section? Well, let's take a step back. We're in the midst of a pandemic, COVID-19, the coronavirus. So Congress passed a law called the CARES Act, and we've all heard of the CARES Act. Well, Sherilyn and I, we've both been in the government contracting space for a while. And I used to be a contracting officer, a federal employee who does the evaluations and the negotiations. And for all the things I've done in my career, I've had to track legislation, just as Sherilyn and I both have been doing. And we both agree, we've never seen something that's so powerful that was designed specifically for federal contractors. So that's the space I focus on. My business helps out, consults for federal contractors and subcontractors. Now, the CARES Act has a specific section, and it's Section 3610, and it's, again, a specific relief for the federal contracting industry. The big idea here is we don't want a lot of people getting laid off and fired in the federal government contracts industry. So what Section 3610 does, it allows the government contracting officers to give you, the contractor, a modification to your contract so that you get more money and you can use that money to pay your employees and your subcontractors when they are not able to work or telework. So good example, there's a disruption due to COVID-19. You provide professional services for, say, the Department of Energy. Your employees cannot go on site for a couple of months because the government work site is just shut down, and your employees are not equipped for telework because they do classified work, let's say. Well, Section 3610 is just for you. It's a specific kind of bailout provision. And again, the idea is the government is going to pay your company so that you can pay your employees and your subcontractors while they are idle, while they are not working, if they cannot work and they cannot telework. And just, again, let's put it in historical perspective. We haven't seen something like this for almost any of the other problems that we've faced over the years. Sherilyn and I were both surprised, but you need to know about this Section 3610, and you need to know some of the basic facts and some of the limitations around it, and we can continue the conversation. But I think that's a good overview. It's going to let you get paid for your employees that cannot work or telework.
Thank you for that, that explanation, Christoph. So let's go a little bit more into CARES and specifically into the PPP loan, which we know probably many people on this webinar have received a PPP loan, and you have clients as well as DBL has clients that have received a loan. So there is discussion and great concern among small businesses and borrowers who have taken a PPP loan regarding the certifications in the application, Christoph, and specifically certifying that a business did not have access to other means of capital.
Yeah.
How does this particular certification impact government contractors vis-a-vis Section 3610, Christoph?
So here's what you need to know. With the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, that's a separate program than Section 3610. So if you're any type of business, you could get a PPP loan, right? But if you're a government contracts business or maybe a subcontractor, Section 3610 is for you. So you need to remember that you can actually take advantage of both of these programs potentially. But what you have to be very careful about is if you're applying to get the Section 3610 money, the Section 3610 money is specifically for you to pay your employees and subcontractors that cannot work or telework. And as part of that request, the government is going to ask you, are you getting any other sources of funding or financing or help? And the PPP program would be a great example of other sources of funding and help. So if you're going to take advantage of both programs, you need to offset your request when you ask for the Section 3610 funding. Okay, so I have a lot of federal clients as well as, private sector primes and subcontractors. And what my federal clients, the contracting officers, are asking for specifically is for you to submit Did you get a PPP loan? How much money did you get? Did you get maybe a economic injury disaster loan or an EIDL loan? Basically anything that's kind of a special loan or a special entitlement or financing that you're taking advantage of because of this unprecedented situation that we're in. They want you to offset that first before you come up with the final amount that you should be asking for with your Section 3610 request. And let me emphasize the Section 3610 request to pay your idle employees that can't work or telework. You're going to be billing to ask for money for the minimum billing rate, right? So whatever they would have been paid, they can actually get a modification to keep them paid so that you don't have to lay off these employees. But remember, this is a time where your consultant, your lawyer like Sherilyn, your accountant, these are the times where you absolutely need to rely on your consultants, your lawyers, your accountants. You need to get that outside help. Don't do it alone. It's as complicated as it's ever been. And you need to make sure that you separate your requests and your financing and your accounting for all these separate programs. And so, again, in the government contract space, not only can we expect that these programs will be audited and reviewed by perhaps the SBA or Congress or the inspectors general, we can expect that they'll be reviewed, so your paperwork has to be spot on. And the other thing to remember also, whenever you're writing anything to the federal government, your invoices, your claims, your request for Section 3610 money, we always have to be concerned with the False Claims Act. So you always want to be as transparent and always as accurate as possible whenever you put anything in writing and you send it to the federal government.
Christoph, that was actually the next question is, really, I wanted to get your thoughts on this Treasury Secretary's comments. I believe now it was probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, saying that those borrowers who took out a PPP loan of $2 million and above can expect an audit from the SBA. But what you're actually articulating for our participants today is that really doesn't matter how much the amount is, that you might expect an audit, and that is why it is very important to keep those very good records, particularly as government contractors, but just in general as PPP loan recipients. Would you agree with that?
For both programs, for any programs. So if you're doing PPP, this applies. If you're doing Section 3610, same deal. If you're getting an economic injury disaster loan, you bet. And the unifying thread with all of these, they're very public. They're very much in the news. It's very much a political question. All eyes are on these programs on both sides of the aisle. So you can expect that the government agencies and maybe even Congress or the GAO, they will be following up. So you don't want to be one of the companies that said, oh, I'll just pencil whip this thing. I won't worry too much about my certifications paperwork. I don't think it'll ever even come back. I won't spend time on it. That would be bad advice. You should take it very seriously. You should get the help you need to fill out all of your paperwork correctly. And you also, as always, you need to be following the changes to this, and they're happening very rapidly. The law is changing. The regulatory implementation is changing because we had to move very quickly. There was a national emergency, a global pandemic. Congress, did their best and threw a law over the fence that gave a lot of extraordinary help, right? Well, now it's on the agencies to figure out exactly what are the details of how we implement that. So we're still kind of getting into those details. But what you need to do as a business owner, know the law, know the regulations, get the experts you need to give you that advice, to give you that interpretation, and spend the time, carefully submit your paperwork.
Good. Thank you, Christoph, for that. Let's pivot to the discussion of telework, our topic today, and forecast out for a minute, Christoph, in this COVID environment, right? Obviously, mostly everyone now is teleworking. And do we think that people are still going to be teleworking in 6 months, Christoph? And if so, what are the other steps? I mean, I have several sub-questions here, but follow with me for a minute. What are some of the other steps that companies should be taking if they're going to continue in this mode 6 months and even beyond, because right now, the new word is new normal.
Yeah.
But what does this new normal look like, Christoph?
Yeah. So great question. Let me pull out my crystal ball. And first I want to talk about, I want to talk about two big changes. One is the big change to just the GovCon space. And then the other is a huge change to our entire American economy.
Right.
So first with GovCon, it used to be, 3 months ago, it used to be the case that if you were a contractor, it was a little bit more tough to telework. Some of them telework, don't get me wrong. But generally speaking, I'll give you the real deal. The federal employees generally had more telework than contractors. Well, that's done. That's over now. So the question, can you request a modification to accommodate telework? Absolutely you can. Now's the time to do it. You probably already have. And now contractors, I would say, are just about at parity, just about equal, where they're just saying the federal government, if you're an employee, if you're a contractor, if you can at all telework whatsoever, we encourage you to telework, and they will accommodate those requests. You're probably already doing it. And that's unprecedented. Didn't used to be that. But now let's shift to the whole economy, any business owner at all, almost any economy, almost any industry line, they're moving towards telework. And we've never seen this before. We've seen before the pandemic, many articles said that telework is important. We live in the digital age, but it took a pandemic to really push us into this environment that we're in now. So here's my advice to you. Here's my crystal ball. Sherilyn asked, is this going to be around in 6 months? Are we still going to be teleworking? I think, yes. I think I think we will have unprecedented high levels of telework. People will start going back to work, but I think many people will continue to do an elevated level of telework because let's think about this. It's been about 2-3 months. Well, we've proven the case, haven't we? We now have the data. We know who can telework and we know who needs a little bit more help with teleworking, but all the supervisors have the data. We see the productivity numbers. It can be done with certain limitations. But for you as a business owner, you need to pull out your crystal ball and think about what it's going to be like 6 months, a year, 2 years from now. Now is the time for you to invest in your IT infrastructure, in your cybersecurity, in your software and your hardware that enables your employees and subcontractors to telework, because it was the pandemic that caused us to move into the scene that we're in now. But I think the smart money is telling you that telework's not going away anytime soon, and that means that you have a new responsibility. You have to ensure that your network communications for your teleworkers is safe. That means you have to be worried about cybersecurity. It means you're probably going to have a little bit more overhead costs because you're going to have to issue laptops to people that may not have had laptops. But then maybe you're going to be saving in turn on other overhead costs like commercial real estate.
So, Christoph, there's a couple other issues maybe that I think business owners, supervisors have to think about. So previously, before COVID, when your employees were all on federal sites, right, contracting, they may not have had access to social media sites or other type of sites during the day. Now your employees are working from home, most likely using their laptops, their employer-issued laptops, but they also may be using their private laptops. Do you think, and accessing other sites during the day, what type of precautions do you think business owners should take in this type of scenario?
So great follow-up question. The first question was about what's actually changing. What do I need to invest in with hardware and software, right? The physical equipment. Well, now Sherilyn's asking about what I would call training, right? We have to be able to train our employees, and we have to have policy. We have to have corporate policies. So just the same as you need to invest in new equipment, new network security, you also need to take the time and invest in training and updating your corporate handbook and your employee handbook, because Sherilyn's making a great point about the fact that there's a big blending between the personal equipment, the personal time, the social media with your work equipment and your work time. So you're going to need to address that now more than ever. And especially for those of you that deal with sensitive, trade secret, or maybe classified work, things like that need to be kept secret and segregated from other types of information, you really need to make sure that you don't do what's called spillover. You don't want to have somebody who's not trained and didn't even know that it was wrong. You don't want them to use their personal laptop to be downloading your company trade secrets or some kind of government protected information, right? So that's a particular risk that we need to be concerned about. And then as far as training your employees, now's the time to do it, and updating that corporate policy, updating that employee handbook. Because let's look at two different companies, okay? One company just said, yeah, we'll send out an email. We'll tell people that they need to do the following, but we don't need to update the handbook. And then the other company, well, they hire Sherilyn and they hire Christoph as a consultant and a lawyer to help them update their handbook. They changed their corporate strategy. They had formal training that was documented with everybody signing a piece of paper saying they were there. And they had the explicit proof that they did what they were supposed to do. So those two companies both have a cybersecurity breach. It's not their fault, but there was a breach. They're both federal contractors. Which one do you think is going to be in a better position when the ensuing investigation happens? This is part of your corporate responsibility, right? You have to take steps to mitigate what might happen. And those of you that are responsible, that update everything, that do the training, that really do make a change to your policy and the employee handbooks, that shows you're doing your due diligence. And I think that's going to be critical.
Right. Thank you, Christoph. Let's go back to modifications for a minute. As we know, modifications can make or break your contract and your bottom line. What, Christoph, do you think would be some tips for small businesses and government contractors navigating the modification process during COVID?
Sure. So I'll give you general advice that applies in COVID, applies today, tomorrow, and 5 years from now. The modifications are critical, and the way you ask for them is going to affect whether you get your modification granted or not and how long it takes. So this is an important topic. It's a topic that I devoted quite a few chapters in my book, Government Contracts in Plain English, to this very topic, because I used to be a contracting officer that would deal with these modifications. Here's what you need to know. When you want to submit a request for a modification to your contract, you need to get more money. Maybe you need to get a schedule extension. Maybe you need some kind of a change. Whatever that request is, you need to understand that you have two lanes. There are two avenues for you to do this formal request. One of them is called a request for equitable adjustment, REA, and one of them is called a claim. Well, a claim is the start of formal litigation under the Contract Disputes Act. And a claim is going to cause the contracting officer to have to write what's called a final decision in writing. So a claim forces the government to answer you within a certain amount of time, probably 90 days in most cases. And it forces the government to give you a written reply. And because it's the first step in litigation, meaning if your claim is denied, you can actually appeal it to the Court of Federal Claims or to the boards of contract appeals. But because it's the first step in litigation, if you were to hire Christoph LLC, or if you were to hire Sherilyn to help you put together that claim, you would not be able to bill the costs of the consultant or the lawyer or the accountant that helped you put together the claim. Now, in the other avenue, the REA, the request for equitable adjustment, that's not the start of litigation. It's a formal request, but it does not trigger that final decision, and it does not create something that would later potentially be appealed to a federal court. So an REA, a request for equitable adjustment, it's actually just considered contract administration, which means the costs of hiring an outside consultant like Christoph LLC or Sherilyn or an accountant, those are considered contract administration costs, and you can bill the government for those outside consultant costs if you do an REA. Now, let me tie it all together for you. You're asking for the same thing here. You need a schedule extension. You need another $20,000 or whatever. You could either do an REA or you could do a claim. It's your choice. You're asking for the exact same thing. The difference is if you start first with the REA, you can bill for the amount of money that you hired an outside consultant to help you with. But if you did a claim first, you cannot. So now that you understand that big, important difference between the two, this is the take-home advice. I advise my clients to almost always submit the REA first. Do the REA first. See if you can recover that way. It's less adversarial. You can recover outside consultant costs. And then if that doesn't work, then you could turn it into a claim. You could package it as a claim. And it's more forceful. It's the start of formal litigation. It forces the contracting officer to write a final decision. But just knowing the difference between an REA and a claim and having somebody on your side that can guide you through that process, that can make a really big difference. But the takeaway for you, file the REA first. And then if that doesn't work, then convert it into a claim, because your REA will be able to capture those outside consultant costs.
Good. Thank you, Christoph. So let's pivot to another question about business-to-business opportunities. So we know that the 3 top federal contracting opportunities in the IT space are cybersecurity, infrastructure, and cloud, right?
Yes, I would agree.
In your opinion, Christoph, what is the demand now, right? Are you seeing a change during COVID for more increased opportunities?
I think I am, because I would say it's only going up. So the biggest IT opportunities out there, and by the way, we're in the DMV, right? IT is a great industry to be in, and it's a huge part of the DMV economy. So we are very well placed in Maryland, DC, and Virginia to take advantage of this. So ears perk up. But what I've been saying in 2018 and what I've been saying in 2019 and what I've been saying in 2020 has been the same thing about IT. You got cloud, you got cybersecurity, and you got IT infrastructure improvements, just improving everything in general for the federal government. Well, in the midst of COVID and teleworking and all this, right, do you think any of that's going away? No way. It's just becoming more and more important. So on the business-to-business front, if you're a company that can provide those services such as augmenting cybersecurity, assessing cybersecurity, maybe improving your IT network infrastructure, this is boom time for you.
Right.
It's boom time for you to sell to the federal government who needs it now more than ever, but it's also boom time for you to sell that to all of your other fellow businesses on a B2B fashion, because they need to get those upgrades as well. And here's a little bit of a hint also. On that cybersecurity front, anybody who's doing DoD contracts, they need to be worried about something called CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. CMMC, that's for DoD contracts only. In a matter of a few months, it's going to be a yes, no. Do you have CMMC certification? And that's a cybersecurity certification. Mm-hmm. Do you have it? Yes, you can get a DoD contract. Are you not qualified for CMMC? That means you are ineligible. That's a big deal. This is a yes/no requirement.
Right.
And let me take it just one step further. CMMC is for the Department of Defense. So you might say, oh, I'm in the civilian sector, Department of Energy, Interior. I don't have to worry about that. I would say you're wrong. The way things usually work in the GovCon space, DoD acts first, and they usually implement the policy. Right. And then it gets spread across the rest of the entire government. So again, Sherilyn, let me pull out my crystal ball. Do I think that the DoD is going to protect their cybersecurity only and then not the civilian agencies a few years later? No way. No way. No way.
Right. We have just one more question, Christoph, that I have for you. And I want to encourage our participants to start queuing up your questions now, because we're going to wrap up with this last question. We love questions. We encourage them. So start thinking right now what you'd like to ask. So Christoph, the last question I have for you is, we know that the House has passed an update, right? Third round of the CARES Act, or PPP loan, to be more exact. And then on Wednesday, the Senate passed the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act of 2020. Now the title is even longer. So what has been the reaction, in your opinion, Christoph, from contracting officers during this time? So even with the start of the first one, the second one, and now the third one, do you sense that this is even more confusing for them? Is it with each legislation that passes? Is it getting easier? Just what is your sense of how the contracting officers are faring during this time?
It's a mess. My assessment is that the contracting officers are confused, and they're rightfully so confused, because I wrote an article about this topic. It's, when does this law take effect in government contracts? It's on my website, christophllc.com. You can download it for free. And the point is, when the law changes, we in the GovCon space, we can't necessarily take advantage of that because we have to wait for the Federal Acquisition Regulation FAR clause to change. So the new FAR clause can be in our contract because we're only really affected by our contract. Right. So what you're seeing is this problem, this long chain of law, then regulation, then policy. We're seeing that in real time. And so we have a law that's very public. Everybody can read about it on CNN.com. But the implementation, the implementation of that law is the responsibility of federal agencies. And we've actually seen quite a bit of confusion as the different agencies, they interpret the law and the provisions of the law very differently. So where does that leave you, the business owner? It leaves you in the same place that you always are. And that same place, it means that it is incumbent upon you to have experts out there advising you on the changes to the law, the changes to the regulation, and what you need to do to be compliant. And there's some evergreen topics that Sherilyn and I would harp on any day of the week, any year. Those evergreen topics are: make sure that you're organized, make sure that you take the time and pay attention to certifications, and don't do it alone. Don't think that you can do it alone. Get a team around you. Have an excellent lawyer like Sherilyn on your side. Have a government contract specialist consultant like me on your side. Now is the time where you need to get that help.
Right. And a good accountant, because the accountants are the ones that are going to get you through the forgiveness process if you have a PPP loan. Rena, I know that we had some questions that people had kind of pre-screened with you, but I'm going to go ahead and start with our first question here. The first question, Christoph, is any insight as to whether contracting officers will force companies performing under CPFF contracts to restate indirect rates?
So the CPFF, for those listening, that's cost plus fixed fee. So we're talking about cost reimbursement contracts where the government is paying you back your actual reasonable incurred costs. As part of that, you have your direct labor, maybe your hourly rates, and then you have what's called your indirect cost rates, right? Your overhead, your G&A. The question is, do we have to update these because of COVID? Well, I'm going to let my friends over at DCAA, Defense Contract Audit Agency, handle those types of questions. But I really don't know. It's a case-by-case basis. But what I would expect, what I would predict, is that you're probably going to have to update them sometime soon. Maybe it's not now, but I think sometime soon they will be asking you to resubmit. I don't know that for a fact. But why I think they would ask you is the exact reason you're asking the question, right? We suddenly have a big change to our overhead costs due to teleworking and due to disruptions. So I do think there will be a ripple effect. I do think it will affect your indirect rates. I think it already has. So I think the government will, in turn, they might be slow to do so, but I think they will ask you to refresh those.
Great. And let me just add, Rena, do we have any other additional questions?
We have two others that have come in prior to our webinar, so I'm going to ask you. One is, will there, or aftermath of this whole COVID-19 situation, can it impact the actual contract period of performance? Because while they're getting paid right now, they're keeping their people employed, some may not be fully productive. They may not be able to produce those deliverables. So what happens to the period of performance of the contract?
Oh, easy answer. The period of performance gets extended. I mean, if the question is, will I need to get period of performance extensions? Will this change my schedule? Yes, absolutely it will. Like I said, I have federal agency clients, not just government contractor and subcontractor clients. I'm already seeing it. I'm on the ground. It's happening. Many, I would say it's got to be thousands of contractors already are getting period of performance extensions due to COVID. They're getting modifications for telework. They're getting period of performance extensions. They're getting additional money. They're getting stop work orders. They're getting all kinds of changes to their contract. And you are absolutely 101% correct to point out that slowdowns and disruptions means that you miss the schedule. And so, again, some evergreen advice, not just COVID, but if anything out of your control that is not your fault makes you miss the schedule, that entitles you to an equitable adjustment, to a contract modification. So if things are not your fault and they're out of your control, you can always ask for that modification, that accommodation to extend the period of performance.
Good. Here's another question, Christoph, from one of our participants today. If you're operating under an FFP contract, does 3610 apply?
Great question. Yes, it does. So for those out there listening, FFP, firm fixed price. Somebody asked about the cost reimbursement contracts. Now they're asking about firm fixed price contracts. Yes. So they gave very specific guidance. Section 3610 does apply if you have a firm fixed price contract. Yes, it does. It also does apply if you have a cost reimbursement contract. Yes, it does. And I'll ask the next question. What if I have a time and materials government contract? Yes, it does apply. And I'll even throw in a bonus. Section 3610 applies to procurement contracts that are firm fixed price, cost reimbursement, time and materials, whatever. But it also applies to other transactions. If any of you have that special type of R&D instrument called an other transaction, that was actually written into the law as well. So contracts, other transactions, any type of payment arrangement, yes, Section 3610 applies.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification. Rena, do we have any other questions in the queue?
Yeah, there are a couple others. I think there's some duplication here. I'm sorry, I'm getting our emails from folks who had registered, so I'm trying to filter through these.
Right.
A curious question you mentioned during your conversation about this as well. PPP and Section 3610 are two separate things. PPP is a loan. Section 3610 is not a loan. Can you just clarify that a little bit more?
Yes. So PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, is a loan, and it's a loan that some of it, if not all of it, might be forgiven. So it's a loan that might turn into free money or a grant or whatever you'd like to call it, okay? The Section 3610 is not a loan. Section 3610 is something that almost entitles you to a modification for more money on your contract. So Section 3610 doesn't mean that the government must give you this modification to pay your employees that are idle, but it means that the government may give you modification to give you extra money to pay your employees and subcontractors that are not working. So Section 3610 is, I don't want to call it free money, but Section 3610 is not a loan. Section 3610 is a way for you to get more money on your contract to make sure that you don't lay off your employees. That's the whole intent. The idea is government contracting is so important that we don't want to have a lot of layoffs. So Section 3610 lets you keep employees and subcontractors on your payroll until the end of this fiscal year. That's September 30th. It lets you keep them on the payroll, and then the government will modify the contract to pay you more money to pay those employees.
And the reason we bring that up for our person who answered the question, the reason we bring them up together in the same context is because the PPP loan is all about keeping your employees employed, and because in that PPP loan application, they have a very specific question that asks whether the borrower has access to other capital, other means of paying their employees. So if you are a government contractor, you need to make sure that you reveal that information, right? And that's why Section 3610 really does apply to you, and that you need to weigh all of these options and make sure you disclose that information on your form.
So I'm going to make a quick comment on that as a as when we provide business intelligence and proposal services, one of the things we do is research previous contract award dollars. So for all contractors, keep in mind that this particular period, the amounts are going to be ballooned. So don't base your future work and make sure you understand that the contract values are going to be skewed during this fiscal year. Very important for business intelligence and your future bidding research that you're going to be doing.
Right. We have another question. We have another question here, Rena, in our in the Q&A. A little long, so let me just read through it and see if I can summarize here for Christoph. Any advice on FAR 31.201-5 as it relates to PPP and the intersect with FFP contracts?
So I'll tell you what, I'll give you a clever answer to that, and that is I have memorized almost all of the FAR in my head except for whatever you just cited. And because the FAR is so difficult to understand and memorize in your head, that's actually why I wrote this book, Government Contracts in Plain English. So if you like what you've been hearing today, I think you should check out my book, Government Contracts in Plain English, selling very well on Amazon. But as far as the question about that specific FAR citation, I don't have that in the top of my head. I can't help you.
Yeah, she gives this particular and gives a little bit more. It's a long question, but it's she says, as we currently understand it, the credits concerns only relates to CAS covered FFP contract and any other cost reimbursable elements of a TNM or CPFF. Oh boy, this is the alphabet here of government contracting, or FFP with CRODC, but FAR 31.201-5 in the PPP should not impact any fixed labor rate or FFP contract, CLIN, but the guidance is vague. So the net from all this, even if anyone doesn't understand all of these codes, is the guidance is vague.
Well, the guidance is vague. I'm not sure what that question is, but what I would say is Section 3610 does apply to a FFP contract. The contracting officer can create a new CLIN, a new contract line item number, CLIN, and they're supposed to create a special new CLIN that's the Section 3610 reimbursement. And they do that in the same way if they have a TNM contract or if they have a cost reimbursement contract. So again, I'm not sure what the specifics of that question is, but if you have a cost reimbursement, time and materials, or an FFP contract, you are still eligible to get this extra money, to get this modification using Section 3610. So I encourage you to act now or very soon. Put in that request for equitable adjustment and try to get that Section 3610 modification. If it applies, and remember, you only get Section 3610 if you have employees or subs that cannot work or telework. So if you're in that situation, you need to check it out.
Right. Well, Christoph, thank you. I think, Rena, that was probably all that we had coming in.
Well, and we have a couple other questions, but I want to be respectful of the time. You're 15 minutes over.
Okay.
Very gracious with your time, Cheryl. Yes. Thank you for your time as well. And to all our participants, I'm including Sherilyn's information. We have shared Christoph's information with you earlier. Please feel free to reach out to them for any help and questions that you have. And Christoph is absolutely right. Please don't try to do this alone. You'll make your life absolutely difficult by doing it.
I have a plug here, Rena, for Christoph's book, which I'm reading, and I just find it so helpful. It really is government contracts in plain English. You know, we just heard that last question that was very, detailed. And again, the government contracting world is full of lots of acronyms, and Christoph breaks everything down very well here. So I thank you to I thank all of our participants today. And again, thank you to Rena and the Asian American Chamber of Commerce, and of course to Christoph for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you both, and thank you so much. If anybody wants to contact me, it's Christoph at christophllc.com. You can find me very easily, and I really do appreciate the opportunity, Sherilyn and Rena, and the Asian American Chamber of Commerce. This was great. I loved it.
Thank you
so much. Take care. And
Thank you.
just as a reminder to all participants, this webinar was recorded. We will be sharing the recording with everyone. There weren't a huge number of PowerPoint slides. No death by PowerPoint here. The recording and the audio will be available on multiple platforms, and we will share the links with all of you. Thank you for your time today and participation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the contracting committee members for their dedication and support to make AACC Government Contracting webinar series possible.